What happens when the girl the village throws stones at becomes the treasure an immortal king would burn kingdoms to protect? Tonight we enter 1800s Bavaria, where 20-year-old Clara Müller has spent her life as the village's convenient target, her twisted foot making her the butt of every cruel joke, her poverty marking her family as barely worth acknowledging. When Harvest Festival brings the entire region together, public humiliation reaches its crescendo as the mayor's son uses her disability for entertainment. But crimson eyes watch from the forest shadows. Lord Nikolai Drachenherz hasn't attended mortal gatherings in 3 centuries, yet whispers of supernatural disturbances have drawn him from his mountain fortress. One glimpse of the broken girl they mock in the town square ignites a territorial fury that will remind this village why their ancestors built walls and prayed for protection from the darkness beyond. If you believe that true nobility isn't born from bloodlines, but forged in the fires of defending those who cannot defend themselves, hit that subscribe button now, because this tale will prove that sometimes the most savage beasts have the gentlest hearts, and the cruelest monsters wear human faces. The Autumn Harvest Festival filled Rothenburg's town square with laughter, music, and the smell of roasted meat that made my empty stomach ache with familiar longing. I pressed myself against the stone wall of the baker's shop, trying to remain invisible while my younger brother Thomas competed in the traditional contests that would determine this year's harvest champion. "Look, there's the cripple!" Wilhelm Schneider's voice cut through the celebration like a blade, his handsome face twisted with casual cruelty that came from never facing consequences. Hiding in the shadows where freaks belong. The mayor's son had made tormenting me his personal entertainment since we were children. My twisted foot, born that way according to the midwife who'd advised my parents to leave me in the forest, made me an easy target for someone who needed to feel superior. "Please," I whispered, knowing it was useless but trying anyway. "I'm just watching Thomas compete." "Watching?" Wilhelm laughed, the sound drawing attention from nearby villagers who sensed fresh sport. "Is that what you call lurking like some deformed ghost? Father says your family should have done the Christian thing and let God take you as an infant." Heat flooded my cheeks, but I'd learned years ago that defending myself only encouraged worse treatment. The village had long ago decided that my disability was either divine punishment for my parents' sins or evidence of demonic taint requiring constant vigilance. "Wilhelm, leave her alone," a quiet voice interjected, and I looked up to see Johann the blacksmith's apprentice, one of the few people who'd ever shown me basic kindness. "She's not bothering anyone." "Not bothering?" Wilhelm's eyes gleamed with malicious inspiration. "Then perhaps she should entertain us properly. Dance for us, cripple. Show us how the lame celebrate harvest." The crowd that gathered carried the particular energy that precedes group cruelty, anticipation mixed with permission to indulge their worst impulses under the guise of harmless fun. "Dance," someone echoed, taking up Wilhelm's command. "Let's see the broken bird try to fly." I tried to retreat, but strong hands seized my arms. Wilhelm's friends, emboldened by mob mentality and too much beer. They dragged me into the center of the square where musicians still played cheerful melodies that now sounded like mockery. "Please don't," I begged, tears streaming down my face as they forced me to stand on my twisted foot. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, but worse was the humiliation as the entire village watched my suffering become their entertainment. Wilhelm pushed me, laughing as I stumbled and nearly fell. The crowd roared with laughter when I tried to maintain balance on a foot that had never worked properly. My desperate attempts to stay upright transformed into grotesque parody of dancing. Then the music stopped. Not gradually, but instantly, as if invisible hands had choked the life from every instrument simultaneously. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds, frost forming on cobblestones despite the autumn warmth. From the forest's edge came a presence that made every person in the square freeze with primal recognition of apex predator. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, elegant, wrapped in clothes that belonged to nobility from forgotten eras. His pale skin seemed to glow in the torchlight, and when he raised his head, crimson eyes blazed with fury that promised terrible consequences. "How festive," he said, his voice carrying an accent from ancient lands. "A celebration of cruelty. How very mortal." Wilhelm stumbled backward, his courage evaporating before the stranger's obvious menace. "Who are you?" "This is a private village matter." "Private." The stranger's smile revealed teeth that gleamed too sharp in the torchlight. "You made this girl's torment a public spectacle. Now permit me to provide my own entertainment." He moved with impossible speed, crossing the square in a heartbeat to stand between me and my tormentors. His presence radiated power that made strong men whimper and brave women faint. "Run," he suggested pleasantly to Wilhelm. "See if mortal legs can outpace immortal hunger." The mayor's son fled, followed by his companions and half the crowd. But the stranger made no move to pursue. Instead, he turned to me with expression that transformed from menacing to infinitely gentle. "Forgive the interruption, Klein," he said softly, extending his hand. "But I couldn't allow such magnificence to be degraded by lesser creatures." Before I could respond, darkness claimed my consciousness. But not before I felt impossibly strong arms catch me with tenderness that contradicted everything the world had taught me about my worth. Lord Nikolai Drachenherz had not felt protective rage in 3 centuries, yet watching mortal filth torment the girl with the twisted foot ignited instincts he'd thought long dead. When she collapsed from pain and humiliation, catching her felt like reclaiming something precious that had been stolen from him before time itself began. "Master," his lieutenant Stefan materialized from shadows, silver eyes reflecting concern that transcended professional duty. "The village is in chaos. Half fled to the church. The rest barricade themselves inside their homes." "Good," Nikolai replied, carrying the unconscious girl toward the forest, with careful attention to her comfort. "Let them remember why their ancestors built walls and prayed for protection." "You plan to slaughter them?" "I plan to teach them that cruelty has consequences," Nikolai corrected, though his voice carried enough menace to make even Stefan nervous. "But first, we care for this one properly." His mountain fortress materialized through supernatural mists, all Gothic spires and impossible architecture that existed partially outside normal dimensions. As ancient as the mountains themselves, Castle Drachenherz had served as sanctuary for beings too powerful for mortal comprehension across countless generations. "Summon Dr. Wilhelm," Nikolai commanded, as he carried the girl through hallways lined with treasures from fallen empires. "Tell him we require his expertise with mortal injuries." "The girl is human, Master." "Why such concern for—" "Because she matters," Nikolai interrupted with finality that ended all questions. "That's sufficient reason." He settled her onto a bed in chambers that had remained empty for centuries, watching her sleeping face with growing fascination. Even unconscious, even marked by years of suffering, she possessed a quality that transcended physical beauty, unbreakable spirit that had survived what would have destroyed lesser souls. "Remarkable," Dr. Wilhelm observed upon entering, his 800 years of medical experience allowing him to assess patients at a glance. Her foot has been twisted since birth, yet she's developed compensatory strength in her other leg that borders on superhuman. Can it be healed? The foot? Perhaps with supernatural intervention. But Master, why? Because I will it, Nikolai said, his tone brooking no argument. Begin treatments immediately. As the doctor worked, Nikolai found himself studying the girl with intensity that surprised him. In 3 centuries of immortal existence, he'd encountered countless beautiful mortals. Yet none had affected him as profoundly as this broken farmer's daughter, sleeping peacefully for the first time in years. Her name is Clara, Stefan reported, returning with intelligence gathered from terrified villagers. Clara Müller, 20 years old, youngest daughter of poor farmers, considered village pariah due to her disability. Pariah, Nikolai repeated with dangerous quiet. They ostracized magnificence because it came wrapped in packaging they lacked wisdom to appreciate. The village elders are requesting audience. They wish to negotiate her return. Do they? Nikolai's smile revealed fangs that promised suffering for anyone foolish enough to threaten his unexpected treasure. How generous! Tell them I'll consider their petition after I've finished teaching them respect for those they've degraded. Master, starting a war with an entire village over one crippled girl is exactly what I'm going to do. Nikolai finished with conviction that had conquered kingdoms. Stefan, in 300 years of service, when have you known me to be merciful to those who prey upon the innocent? Never, my lord. Then why would I start now? Nikolai returned his attention to the sleeping girl, noting how peaceful she looked, freed from constant pain and fear. Besides, she's not just one crippled girl. She's my crippled girl, and anyone who touches what's mine learns why monsters exist. When Clara's eyes finally fluttered open, they widened with shock at her surroundings. Nikolai moved to her bedside with careful slowness, allowing her to adjust to consciousness without additional trauma. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice carrying the rough quality of someone who'd cried too many tears. "Safe," he replied simply. "You're safe now, Klein. And I promise you this, no one will hurt you again." But even as he made that vow, crimson eyes watched from the castle's shadows, and Nikolai sensed that protecting Clara would require confronting threats far more dangerous than cruel villagers. I should have been terrified, imprisoned in a castle that defied natural law, attended by beings whose eyes glowed with supernatural light, protected by a creature who'd revealed fangs in the town square. Instead, I felt the unfamiliar sensation of genuine safety for the first time in my life. "You're awake," the man, Nikolai, I remembered, said from his position beside my bed. His crimson eyes held concern rather than the disgust I'd grown accustomed to seeing. "How do you feel?" "Confused," I admitted honestly. "And not in pain?" "Dr. Wilhelm applied healing treatments while you slept. Your foot will require time and additional care, but improvement is possible." The casual mention of healing what every mortal physician had declared hopeless made me study him with new understanding. The impossible castle, the supernatural servants, his obvious power, all pointed to conclusions that should have terrified me. "You're a vampire," I said, testing the word that had been whispered in fear throughout my childhood. "I am." No denial, no attempt to soften the truth. "Does that frighten you?" "Should it?" I met his gaze despite every instinct screaming to look away. "You've shown me more kindness in one night than my own village provided in 20 years. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise mixed with approval that made my heart race in ways that had nothing to do with fear. "Tell me about them," he commanded gently. "The villagers who made your life miserable." So I did. Years of accumulated hurt poured out in a torrent. The constant mockery, the casual cruelty, the systematic exclusion from every normal joy. How children threw stones and called it play. How adults whispered that my parents should have abandoned me as an infant. How even my own family treated me as burden rather than blessing. "Wilhelm Schneider," I said, his name tasting like poison, "has made tormenting me his life's entertainment. The mayor encourages it, says it builds his son's confidence to dominate those beneath his station." Nikolai's expression darkened with each revelation, his supernatural nature becoming more apparent as rage built behind his controlled facade. By the time I finished, frost had formed on the windows despite the castle's warmth. "They will answer for every slight," he said, with quiet menace that made my bones vibrate. "Every insult, every humiliation, every moment of pain they inflicted, all will be repaid with interest that compounds across eternity. You'd start a war over me?" The concept was so foreign that I struggled to comprehend it. "I'd end a civilization over you," he corrected with conviction that left no room for doubt. "Clara, you need to understand something. In 300 years of immortal existence, I've learned to recognize quality when I encounter it. And you possess more authentic worth than everyone in that pathetic village combined." Before I could respond, urgent voices echoed from the hallway. Stefan burst through the door with news that transformed Nikolai's protective concern into strategic calculation. "The village has sent delegation. They're offering compensation for your interference in their harvest festival." "Compensation?" Nikolai's laughter was like breaking glass. "They believe gold can purchase forgiveness for what I witnessed? They're not offering gold, Master. They're offering her." Stefan's expression revealed distaste for mortals who would trade a person like livestock. "Her father agreed to permanent surrender of his daughter in exchange for your promise to leave the village in peace." The revelation struck me like a physical blow. My own father, choosing village safety over his daughter's welfare. But what hurt more was realizing I'd expected nothing better. "I see," Nikolai said with dangerous calm. "Then perhaps we should discuss terms of this arrangement." His smile promised that the villagers would regret every choice that had led to this moment. The village delegation arrived at sunset, led by my father and Mayor Schneider. They climbed the mountain path with obvious terror, their every step weighted by awareness that they ventured into a predator's domain. I watched from the castle's great hall, positioned where they couldn't see me but I could observe their submission. "Lord Drachenherz," Mayor Schneider began with forced courtesy that poorly masked his fear. "We come seeking peaceful resolution to last night's misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Nikolai's voice carried across the hall with authority that made grown men flinch. "Is that what you call torturing a defenseless girl for entertainment?" "She's just—" my father started, then stopped when Nikolai's crimson gaze fixed on him with predatory intensity. "Choose your next words carefully," the vampire lord suggested pleasantly. "I'm curious whether you'll dismiss your own daughter's worth before or after I demonstrate the cost of such dismissal." The delegation shifted nervously, clearly unprepared for a vampire who cared about mortal suffering beyond its entertainment value. "We've come to offer compensation," Mayor Schneider said, producing a document with trembling hands. "Formal surrender of Clara Müller to your custody, absolving her family of any obligation to her welfare. In exchange, we request your assurance that our village will not face supernatural retaliation. You're selling me? I stepped into view before Nikolai could respond, my voice steadier than I'd expected. Offering me like livestock to avoid consequences for your cruelty. My father couldn't meet my eyes. Clara, you must understand. The village's survival has always mattered more than mine, I finished for him. I understand perfectly, Father. I've understood for 20 years. The girl's feelings are irrelevant, Mayor Schneider interjected, with the casual dismissal that had defined my entire existence. She's a burden we're willing to surrender. The question is whether your lordship accepts these terms. Nikolai descended from his throne with movements that suggested coiled violence barely restrained. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that made the hall's windows vibrate. Let me clarify what you're offering, he said with deadly precision. You systematically abused this girl for 2 decades, made her life a daily nightmare, denied her basic human dignity, and now you believe handing her over to a vampire absolves your guilt. We thought, that is, given your obvious interest. My interest, Nikolai interrupted, is in teaching you that cruelty has consequences. But you've provided me with something far more valuable than mere vengeance. He moved to stand beside me, his presence radiating protection that made my heart race in ways I was beginning to recognize as more than gratitude. You've given me legal claim to someone I intended to protect regardless. Tell me, Mayor Schneider, when you drafted this document, did you consider what might happen if I actually accepted your terms? Accepted. The mayor's face paled as he realized his tactical error. But surely you wouldn't want a broken farmer's daughter who's been society's scapegoat her entire life. Nikolai smiled with predatory satisfaction. On the contrary, she's the most valuable thing I've acquired in 3 centuries. He turned to me, his crimson eyes holding questions that would determine both our futures. Clara, he said softly, they're offering you a choice, though they don't realize it. You can return to the village that made your life hell, or you can stay here where you'll be valued, protected, cherished. The decision is yours alone. And if I stay, then you become mine in truth rather than just legal fiction, he replied with intensity that made the air between us crackle. Mine to protect, mine to care for, mine to ensure never suffers again. Looking at my father's ashamed face, the mayor's contemptuous expression, and then back to Nikolai's fierce devotion, I realized the choice was simpler than anyone expected. I'll stay, I said, feeling chains I'd worn for 20 years finally break. If you'll have me. Always, he promised. And in that moment, I understood that monsters were sometimes the kindest creatures you could encounter. The village delegation fled before midnight, their legal documents signed and witnessed by beings whose existence they doubted until facing them directly. As their torches disappeared down the mountain path, I stood in the castle's great hall, feeling simultaneously liberated and terrified by the magnitude of my choice. Second thoughts, Nikolai asked, appearing beside me with the silent grace that marked his supernatural nature. Third and fourth thoughts, I admitted, but not about staying, about whether I'm strong enough for whatever comes next. You've survived 20 years of systematic cruelty, he observed with gentle certainty. Strength is not your deficiency, Klein. You simply haven't had anyone recognize it before. Over the following days, my new existence became a revelation in ways both profound and practical. Dr. Wilhelm's treatments worked miracles that mortal medicine couldn't achieve. my twisted foot gradually straightening, pain diminishing to manageable levels, mobility increasing daily. Supernatural healing accelerates natural recovery, the ancient physician explained during one session. Your body has always wanted to correct itself. We're simply providing resources it previously lacked. But physical healing was only part of my transformation. For the first time in my life, I had access to education beyond basic literacy. Castle Drachenhertz's library contained thousands of volumes spanning centuries, and Nikolai encouraged me to explore them freely. Knowledge is power, he said one evening, finding me absorbed in philosophical texts that would have been forbidden to someone of my station. And you, my dear Clara, are going to become very powerful indeed. Why? I asked, marking my place in Plato's Republic. Why invest so much in someone the world deemed worthless? Because the world is full of fools who mistake packaging for content, he replied, settling beside me with casual intimacy that was becoming comfortable rather than alarming. You possess intelligence, resilience, compassion, despite every reason to become bitter, qualities that most nobles lack despite their impeccable bloodlines. His words resonated with longing I'd suppressed for years, the secret hope that I was more than my disability suggested, that my worth transcended others' limited perception. Tell me about your life, I requested, hungry for understanding of this being who'd transformed my existence. 300 years is incomprehensible. So he shared stories that spanned centuries, wars he'd witnessed, empires he'd watched rise and fall, the evolution of human cruelty that remained depressingly constant despite technological advancement. I've seen humanity at its worst and best, he concluded. The worst is casual, everyday cruelty like what you experienced. The best is rare courage to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Like you did for me? Like you'll do for others, he corrected with conviction that took my breath away. Clara, I didn't rescue you to keep you locked away like some precious treasure. I saved you so you could become the person you were always meant to be. And who is that? We'll discover together, he promised, taking my hand with reverence that made my heart race. But our peaceful transformation was interrupted by Stefan's urgent arrival, his expression carrying news that transformed comfort into concern. Master, the order has arrived. 20 hunters, armed with blessed weapons and carrying authorization from Rome itself. The Order of the Silver Dawn, Nikolai said with weary recognition. I should have expected this. What do they want? I asked, though growing dread suggested I already knew the answer. They're vampire hunters, he explained with dangerous calm, and they've come to liberate you from what they perceive as demonic captivity. Through the windows, I could see torches gathering at the castle's base, not the frightened villagers from before, but trained warriors whose purpose was exterminating beings like Nikolai. They think they're saving me, I realized with bitter irony. They have no idea I finally found salvation. Then we'll educate them, Nikolai said, his smile revealing fangs that promised these hunters would learn exactly how dangerous it was to threaten what belonged to him. Together, the Order of the Silver Dawn assembled at our gates with military precision that spoke of professional experience hunting supernatural beings. Through the castle's ancient windows, I watched 20 warriors arrange themselves in formation designed to counter vampire tactics, crossbows loaded with blessed bolts, silver weapons that could deliver true death, holy water that would burn immortal flesh like acid. They've come prepared, Stefan observed, his 8 centuries of combat experience assessing their strategy with professional detachment. These aren't villagers with pitchforks. These are trained killers who've survived previous encounters. Good, Nikolai replied with predatory satisfaction that made the room's temperature drop. I prefer prey that understands exactly how outmatched they are. Master, perhaps negotiation. They came to my home threatening someone under my protection, Nikolai interrupted with finality. Negotiation ended when they decided Clara needed liberation from my care. A voice boomed across the courtyard, amplified by speaking trumpet that carried righteous authority. Vampire! Release the innocent girl you've enthralled. The Holy Church commands your obedience. I moved to the window before Nikolai could stop me, my newly healing foot allowing me to walk with minimal pain. The hunters below wore expressions of grim determination, men convinced they were performing sacred duty by destroying evil. I'm not enthralled, I called down, my voice carrying clearly in the mountain air. I chose to stay here. The demon has corrupted your mind, child, their leader replied with the particular condescension that men reserve for women they believe incapable of rational thought. We've come to save you from supernatural influence. Save me. Anger I'd suppressed for years erupted in words that burned. Where were you when my own village mocked me daily? When children threw stones and adults turned away? When I was made to dance on my twisted foot for their entertainment? The hunters shifted uncomfortably, clearly unprepared for a victim who defended her supposed captor. The vampire has twisted your perceptions, their leader insisted. Made you believe kindness justifies association with creatures damned by God himself. Creatures damned by God have shown me more genuine kindness than God's supposed servants ever did, I shot back, surprising myself with my boldness. You don't want to save me. You want to force me back into a life where people like you can continue ignoring suffering that makes you uncomfortable. Nikolai appeared beside me, his presence radiating protective fury that made even trained hunters step backward involuntarily. The lady has spoken her choice, he declared with authority that transcended mortal comprehension. I suggest you honor it and depart while you still possess the capability. We cannot leave a Christian soul in demonic captivity, their leader replied, though his voice carried less conviction than before. Our sacred oath, your sacred oath can go to hell along with your righteous hypocrisy, I interrupted, shocked by my own vehemence. I was in captivity my entire life, imprisoned by others' cruelty, limited by their narrow definitions of worth. Lord Drachenherz freed me from that prison. If you truly serve goodness, you'd celebrate that liberation rather than trying to force me back into suffering. The silence that followed my outburst stretched across the courtyard like tangible presence. Several hunters lowered their weapons, clearly struggling with cognitive dissonance between their assumptions about vampires and the reality before them. She's been deceived, their leader said, though he sounded like he was trying to convince himself. Prepare the assault. We'll extract her by force if necessary. But before they could advance, Stefan materialized between them and the castle entrance, flanked by a dozen vampire warriors whose collective age spanned millennia. Gentlemen, Stefan said with deadly politeness, I should mention that we outnumber you 3-1, possess supernatural speed and strength, know this terrain intimately, and have the moral high ground of protecting someone who explicitly wishes to remain here. He smiled, revealing fangs that gleamed in torchlight. But please do attempt your assault. It's been a dull century, and we could use the exercise. The hunter's leader faced a choice between tactical retreat and suicidal advance against clearly superior force. His decision would determine whether this became negotiation or massacre. The hunter's leader, Father Marcus, according to the cross, emblazoned on his armor, stood paralyzed by impossible choice. His training demanded he continue the assault despite overwhelming disadvantage. His survival instinct screamed retreat, while escape remained possible. "There's another option," I called down before violence could erupt. "Come inside. Talk to me without weapons. See for yourself whether I'm enthralled or free." "Absolutely not," Nikolai said immediately. "I won't expose you to danger from religious zealots." "They're not zealots," I interrupted, surprising both him and myself. "They're men who genuinely believe they're doing good." "Let me show them the truth." The tension in Nikolai's shoulders revealed his reluctance, but after a moment's consideration, he nodded with careful precision. "5 of you," he declared to the hunters. "Unarmed, for your own safety as much as ours. Come inside. Speak with Clara directly. Verify her statements." Father Marcus conferred with his men before responding. "Agreed. But if she's been harmed in any way, then you can attempt your doomed rescue," Stefan finished pleasantly. "Shall we proceed?" What followed was the strangest negotiation I'd ever witnessed. 5 trained vampire hunters sat in Castle Drachenhertz's elegant drawing room, sipping tea served by immortal beings they'd been trained to destroy, while I explained exactly how I'd come to be there. "He saved me," I said simply, showing them my healing foot. "Not enslaved, not enthralled, saved. From public humiliation, from a life of endless cruelty, from a village that treated me as less than human." "But he's a vampire," Father Marcus protested, though his conviction was crumbling. "An unholy creature who feeds on human blood. And you're a holy warrior who was prepared to storm this castle and kill everyone inside to save me," I replied with gentle firmness. "Which of you has actually shown me mercy?" The hunters exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly struggling with reality that didn't match their training. "Miss Mueller," Father Marcus tried again. "Even if his intentions seem kind now, vampires are cursed creatures. Eventually, his nature will corrupt. His nature is protecting innocence from those who prey upon them," I interrupted. "I've seen more genuine goodness from this cursed creature than from the church-going villagers who tormented me my entire life." "She speaks truth," admitted Brother Thomas, the youngest hunter whose idealism hadn't yet hardened into dogma. "We investigated her village before coming here. The stories we heard, what they did to her, was monstrous," Father Marcus finished reluctantly. "But that doesn't justify—" "Doesn't justify what?" Nikolai asked, appearing in the doorway with wine that his servants had brought. "Providing sanctuary to someone your Christian neighbors had systematically abused? Offering healing to someone your physicians had declared hopeless? Treating with dignity a girl your society deemed worthless?" The accusation hung in the air, forcing the hunters to confront uncomfortable truths about the world they'd been defending. "The order exists to protect humans from supernatural predators," Father Marcus said, though his voice lacked its earlier certainty. "How can we reconcile that mission with this?" "Perhaps by acknowledging that evil wears many faces," I suggested. "Some monsters have fangs and drink blood. Others wear crosses and hide their cruelty behind righteousness." The conversation continued deep into the night, transforming from confrontation into dialogue that challenged assumptions on both sides. By dawn, Father Marcus and his hunters were facing reality that their training hadn't prepared them for. Sometimes the monsters were more merciful than the men. "We won't attack," Father Marcus finally declared as his delegation prepared to depart. "But neither can we officially sanction a vampire harboring a human, regardless of circumstances." I'll accept that compromise, Nikolai replied with diplomatic grace that surprised everyone. But as the hunters descended the mountain, I noticed Father Marcus pause to speak with Brother Thomas, their urgent whispers suggesting that our encounter had created divisions within the order itself. Some seeds of change take root in the most unexpected soil. 3 months after the hunters' departure, my life had transformed in ways I'd never imagined possible. My foot had healed enough that I could walk without pain, run without stumbling, even dance, though I had no occasion for such frivolity in the castle. But physical healing was minor compared to the other changes that were reshaping my existence. You're learning remarkably fast, Nikolai observed as I practiced the combat techniques Stefan had been teaching me. Most mortals require years to master what you've absorbed in weeks. Most mortals didn't spend 20 years developing compensatory strength to overcome disability, I replied, executing a defensive maneuver that would have seemed impossible months ago. I'm just redirecting skills I've always had. The training wasn't just physical. Nikolai had taken personal responsibility for my education in history, philosophy, politics, even the supernatural world's hidden hierarchies. Each evening, we sat together in the library discussing everything from Aristotle's ethics to vampire treaty negotiations that predated human civilization. You treat me as an equal, I observed during one such session, watching him consider my analysis of medieval power structures with genuine interest. Why? Because you are my equal, he replied with simple conviction. Intelligence and worth aren't determined by species or social status, Clara. You've proven yourself sharper than most nobles I've encountered across 3 centuries. His words warmed me in ways that transcended gratitude, stirring feelings I'd never expected to experience. When had this ancient predator transformed from savior to something more? Nikolai, I said carefully, testing unfamiliar emotional territory. What am I to you, beyond someone you rescued? He was silent for so long that I feared I'd overstepped. Then he set aside his book and turned to me with expression that held centuries of accumulated longing. You're everything I stopped believing I could have, he admitted with vulnerability that made my breath catch. Companionship beyond mere survival. Conversation that challenges rather than flatters. Someone whose worth I recognize not despite her differences, but because of them. You could have anyone, I whispered. Beautiful, immortal beings who could match your power. Power is useless without purpose, he interrupted gently. For 3 centuries, I've existed rather than lived. Protecting mortals gave me purpose, but you give me reason. His hand found mine, cool fingers intertwining with my warm ones in a gesture that spoke of more than mere affection. Clara, I'm proposing something unprecedented. Not just protection or education, but true partnership. You, transformed into my equal in reality rather than just potential. Immortal, powerful, forever. The offer hung between us like destiny waiting to be claimed or rejected. Transformation into a vampire meant abandoning any hope of mortal life, accepting eternal hunger, existing as a being that church and society would condemn as demonic. What would that mean? I asked, needing to understand completely. Eternity together, he replied simply. Power to protect rather than be protected. Freedom to become everything you were always meant to be without mortal limitations constraining your potential. And if I refuse, then I continue protecting you for whatever mortal lifetime you possess, he promised without hesitation. The choice must be yours, Clara. I won't transform anyone against their will, regardless of my own desires. His sincerity was evident in every word. He truly would accept my mortality, cherish me for decades rather than centuries. Let me age and die while he remained eternally unchanged. I need time, I said, though my heart had already begun gravitating toward acceptance. You have all the time you need, he assured me, though I could see the hope burning in his crimson eyes. This decision will reshape your entire existence. Take whatever time necessary to be certain. But that night, as I lay in bed contemplating eternity, urgent voices shattered the castle's peaceful silence. I rushed to the window to see torches gathering at the base of the mountain. Not the Order's disciplined formation, but a mob's chaotic fury. The village, Stefan reported grimly, appearing at my door, led by Wilhelm Schneider and half the surrounding region. They're demanding your return. My return? I couldn't comprehend the audacity. They signed documents surrendering all claim to me. Apparently, your father has been spreading tales of demonic coercion, claiming you were kidnapped against your will. They've convinced themselves they're mounting a rescue. I looked at Nikolai, seeing the predatory fury building behind his controlled facade. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about mortals who refused to accept consequences for their own actions. Let me talk to them, I said with sudden certainty. Let me show them exactly what their cruelty created. Clara, please, I interrupted, holding his gaze. I need to face them. Not as their victim, but as something they can never hurt again. He studied me for a long moment before nodding slowly. Then we faced them together. As we descended toward the gathering mob, I made my decision about eternity. Some choices are born not from careful consideration, but from crystal-clear understanding of who you want to become, and who deserves to walk beside you into forever. The mob had swelled to over 100 villagers by the time we reached the castle gates. Torches painted their faces in flickering light that revealed fear poorly disguised as righteous anger. At their head stood Wilhelm Schneider, my father, and Mayor Schneider, the architects of my former misery now claiming to be my saviors. Clara! My father called out, his voice cracking with emotion that might have moved me months ago. We've come to bring you home, daughter. This creature has held you against your will long enough. Against my will? I stepped forward before Nikolai could stop me, my healed foot carrying me with grace that made the crowd murmur in shock. Father, when have you ever cared about my will? The demon has twisted your mind, Wilhelm shouted, his handsome face ugly with frustrated rage, making you believe his captivity is freedom. Captivity? I laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut. I lived in captivity for 20 years, imprisoned by your cruelty, limited by your narrow definitions of worth. Lord Drachenherz freed me from that prison. He's bewitched you, Mayor Schneider insisted, made you forget your Christian duty to your family and village. My Christian duty. Anger I'd suppressed for 2 decades erupted in words that burned. Where was your Christian charity when you made me dance on my twisted foot for entertainment? Where was family love when Father signed documents selling me like livestock? The crowd shifted uncomfortably, clearly not expecting articulate defiance from someone they remembered as broken and submissive. The Church supports our mission, Wilhelm declared, producing letters with official seals. The bishop himself has declared this vampire's actions an abomination requiring divine intervention. The same church whose priests told my parents to abandon me as an infant, I shot back. Forgive me if I question their moral authority. Enough of this, Wilhelm gestured to the mob. We outnumber them 10-1. Storm the gates. Reclaim what was stolen. But before anyone could advance, Nikolai stepped forward with presence that made even the bravest villagers retreat involuntarily. You want her back? He asked with dangerous quiet. Then ask her. Not demand, not claim ownership. Ask. Like you would ask any person with agency over their own existence. The silence that followed was broken only by crackling torches and nervous breathing. Clara, my father finally said, his voice small and broken. Will you come home? To what? I asked, genuinely curious. To a life where I'm barely tolerated? Where my disability is treated as family shame? Where people like Wilhelm make my existence their personal entertainment? Things could be different, he tried weakly. Could they? I looked at the assembled crowd, seeing the same faces that had mocked me for years. Would you defend me if Wilhelm started his games again? Would you stand up to the mayor when he suggests I should have died at birth? Would any of you choose me over your own comfort? The silence answered more eloquently than words. I thought not, I said with sad finality. Father, you gave me away because protecting me was inconvenient. Don't pretend this rescue mission is about love. It's about pride. You can't stand that the daughter you discarded found value elsewhere. Clara, please. I forgive you, I interrupted gently. All of you. For the cruelty, the neglect, the systematic destruction of my self-worth. I forgive you because holding on to that pain would only hurt me now. I turned to Nikolai, making a decision that would echo through eternity. But I'm not coming back. My place is here now, with someone who sees my worth rather than my disability, with someone who offers partnership rather than tolerance. Then you condemn your soul! Wilhelm screamed, his composure finally shattering. Choose the demon over your own people and face eternal damnation. If loving someone who treats me with dignity damns my soul, I replied with perfect calm, then heaven is run by creatures far more monstrous than any vampire. I took Nikolai's hand, intertwining my fingers with his cool ones in a gesture that declared my choice to everyone present. I'm staying. Forever, if he'll have me. Nikolai's smile revealed fangs that gleamed in torchlight, not threatening, but triumphant. Forever it is, he promised. And as the mob dispersed in defeat, I felt chains I'd worn for 20 years finally shatter completely. The transformation ceremony took place 3 nights later, in the castle's highest tower, where ancient magic still lingered in stone and starlight. Nikolai had insisted I take additional time to ensure certainty, but my decision had crystallized the moment I'd faced my former life and felt nothing but relief at leaving it behind. There's no returning once this begins, he warned one final time, his crimson eyes holding centuries of caution born from witnessing too many regretted transformations. Mortality surrendered cannot be reclaimed. I'm not surrendering anything, I corrected, pulling him closer. I'm claiming everything I was always meant to be. The ritual itself was intimate rather than ceremonial, just Nikolai and me, his ancient blood mixing with mine as supernatural forces rewrote my very existence according to patterns older than human civilization. Pain flared briefly before giving way to overwhelming sensation of becoming more than I'd been, of limitations dissolving like morning mist. When I opened my eyes as something new and eternal, the world blazed with colors that mortal vision couldn't perceive. Every sound carried layers of meaning I'd never suspected. while scents revealed stories written in molecules and emotions. But most remarkably, the constant low-grade pain that had defined my existence, even after healing, had vanished completely. "How do you feel?" Nikolai asked, his voice carrying harmonics that my enhanced hearing translated into symphonies. "Complete," I replied honestly, marveling at legs that now possessed supernatural strength, at a body that finally matched the spirit that had always refused to be broken. Like I've been living in a cage my entire life and someone finally opened the door. "Not just someone," he said with possessive satisfaction that made my newly immortal heart race. "Your mate, your partner, your equal for all eternity." Over the following weeks, I discovered that vampire abilities extended far beyond physical enhancement. My mind processed information with crystalline clarity that made my previous intelligence seem dim by comparison. I could read entire books in minutes, understand complex concepts instantly, retain perfect memory of every experience. "You're adapting remarkably well," Stefan observed during one of our training sessions, watching me execute combat maneuvers that had taken him decades to master. Most new vampires require years to adjust to enhanced capabilities. Most new vampires didn't spend their mortal lives learning to overcome limitations that should have been crippling, I replied, demonstrating techniques that combined supernatural speed with strategic thinking born from years of physical disadvantage. But physical prowess and intellectual enhancement were secondary to the most profound change, the bond that had formed between Nikolai and me during transformation. I could feel his emotions as if they were my own, sense his presence even when separated by distance, understand his thoughts before he voiced them. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Wilhelm admitted during one of his examinations. "Vampire mates typically develop bonds over centuries. Yours formed instantaneously, with intensity that suggests something beyond normal transformation. Perhaps because our connection existed before the change," Nikolai suggested, his hand finding mine with the unconscious ease that marked true partnership. Physical transformation simply made manifest what already existed between us. 3 months into my immortal existence, a messenger arrived from the Order of the Silver Dawn bearing news that would test our newfound bond in ways neither could have anticipated. "Father Marcus requests audience," Stefan reported, his expression suggesting the news was both important and troubling. "He comes not as hunter, but as ally. The Order is facing a threat they cannot combat alone." "What kind of threat?" I asked, my enhanced instincts already sensing that this would require everything we'd both become. "The kind that makes vampire hunters seek vampire aid," Stefan replied grimly. "Something ancient has awakened in the Black Forest. Something that views both mortal and immortal as equally expendable resources." Nikolai's expression darkened with recognition that spanned centuries. "Mephistopheles?" "Who?" I asked, though the name itself made my new vampire nature recoil instinctively. "The first vampire," Nikolai explained with dread that transcended his usual confidence. "The one who created our entire species and has spent 3 millennia regretting that decision." Through the windows, storm clouds gathered with unnatural speed, and I sensed that our peaceful transformation period was ending. The real war was about to begin. Mephistopheles arrived with the storm, his presence making reality itself seem to curdle around the edges. From the Black Forest came a figure that challenged sanity, beautiful in the way that poisonous flowers are beautiful, elegant like sharpened razors, ancient beyond any earthly measure. When he smiled, the very air seemed to weep at the corners. "Still playing protector, young Nikolai," His voice carried harmonics that made even vampire hearing bleed with pain. And I see you've created a companion. How domestically tragic. You were bound, Nikolai replied with carefully controlled fury. The Council of Ancients sealed you away 3 centuries ago. Seals weaken when those who maintain them grow complacent, Mephistopheles observed with clinical detachment. And the Council has grown wonderfully complacent, distracted by their little experiments in peaceful coexistence. I felt power radiating from this creature that dwarfed anything I'd encountered. Not just supernatural strength, but malevolence so pure it existed as its own elemental force. Yet something about his presence triggered recognition in my newly transformed instincts. "You're afraid," I said, the realization crystallizing as I analyzed his behavior with enhanced perception. "All this power, all this ancient menace, you're terrified of what we represent." Mephistopheles' attention shifted to me with interest that made my immortal skin crawl. "Clever little fledgling. Yes, I fear what you represent. The possibility that vampires might evolve beyond their nature as predators, that we might become something other than perfect killing machines. Because if we can change," Nikolai continued, understanding dawning, "it proves your philosophy is wrong. That creation isn't meaningless, that choice matters, that love is stronger than hunger." "Precisely," Mephistopheles confirmed with satisfaction that promised suffering. "Which is why you must be destroyed before your infection spreads. The Order of the Silver Dawn will help me accomplish that goal, though they don't yet realize it." "The Order would never ally with you," I protested. "Won't they?" His smile revealed fangs that made Nikolai's look decorative. "I've spent the last century whispering in the right ears, nudging religious extremism toward useful conclusions. They believe they're purging demonic influence. In reality, they're eliminating vampires who might threaten my supremacy." The scope of his manipulation was staggering. Centuries of careful influence, turning humanity's religious institutions into weapons against supernatural beings who dared to evolve beyond their predatory origins. "Father Marcus came here to warn us," Stefan said, joining our confrontation with news that confirmed our worst fears. "The Order's leadership has been compromised. They're planning a coordinated assault on every vampire sanctuary that practices peaceful coexistence. Systematic extermination disguised as holy crusade," Mephistopheles agreed cheerfully. "Mortals are remarkably efficient at genocide when convinced of their righteousness." "What do you want?" Nikolai demanded, though the answer was already becoming clear. "Submission," Mephistopheles said simply. "Acknowledgement that your experiment in evolution has failed, that vampires cannot transcend their nature as apex predators. Bow before me, abandon your pathetic attempt at peaceful coexistence, and I'll call off the hunters. And if we refuse, then I ensure every vampire who dared to dream of something better than endless hunger dies screaming in blessed fire," he replied with casual cruelty, "along with every mortal foolish enough to trust them." The ultimatum hung in the air like approaching apocalypse. Around us, the assembled vampire community faced impossible choice: surrender their very identity or face extermination backed by humanity's most powerful religious institutions. "There's another option," I said, surprising everyone, including myself. "We prove you wrong so decisively that even corrupted mortals can't ignore the truth." "And how exactly would you accomplish such miracle?" Mephistopheles asked with amusement that promised this would be entertaining at least. "By being exactly what you claim we cannot be," I replied with growing conviction. "By proving that vampires who choose protection over predation love over hunger, creation over destruction, are stronger than those who embrace mindless savagery. Foolish child, he laughed. You've been vampire for mere months. I've perfected the art of destruction across 3 millennia. Then prove it, I challenged, feeling Nikolai's support flowing through our bond. Face us directly. Show us this vaunted power that requires manipulation and deception to accomplish its goals. His laughter cut off abruptly, ancient rage finally cracking his polished facade. Very well, fledgling. Tomorrow night when the moon goes dark, I'll demonstrate exactly why I am the first and why you are merely temporary. He vanished into shadows that left the scent of sulfur and rotting hope. But his final words echoed with supernatural resonance that made every vampire present understand we'd just declared war on the very concept of evil itself. The final battle took place not in the physical realm, but in the space between, a dimension where philosophical truths carried more weight than any weapon, where the strength of conviction could reshape reality itself. Mephistopheles had chosen this battlefield specifically because physical force meant nothing here. Only the purity of one's purpose mattered. Behold true nature, he declared as the dimension filled with visions of vampire atrocities spanning millennia. This is what we are. Predators who destroy, hunger that consumes, darkness that devours light. No, I replied, calling forth my own visions with power I was only beginning to understand. This is what we were. Watch what we've become. Images flooded the space. Nikolai protecting innocent villagers across centuries. Stefan teaching young vampires to value mortal life. Dr. Wilhelm healing the wounded regardless of species. But most powerfully, my own transformation, from broken girl to healed woman to immortal protector, each stage proving that evolution was possible when love provided direction. Illusions! Mephistopheles snarled, his ancient certainty wavering. Temporary aberrations that prove nothing. They prove everything, Nikolai said, joining his strength to mine as our bond created light that pushed back primordial darkness. You created vampires to be perfect predators, but you couldn't account for the one force stronger than any hunger, the choice to love rather than destroy. Around us, other vampires began adding their voices to our chorus. Those who'd spent centuries protecting mortals rather than preying upon them, who'd chosen to build rather than destroy, who'd proven that supernatural power could serve creation rather than corruption. You're outnumbered, Stefan observed with grim satisfaction. Every vampire who dared to evolve beyond their base nature stands against you now. And we're not alone, I added, sensing presences that transcended even vampire power. The mortals you tried to manipulate are here too. Father Marcus materialized beside us, followed by Brother Thomas and dozens of other order members who'd chosen truth over manipulation. We were fools, Father Marcus admitted, his presence adding human faith to our supernatural determination. Believing that all vampires were demons simply because some chose evil. You taught us that choice matters more than nature. The battle that followed was unlike any physical conflict. It was a war of narratives, competing visions of what supernatural beings could become. Mephistopheles wielded millennia of cruelty, proof that vampires had always been monsters. We countered with growing evidence that monsters could choose to become heroes. I am eternal, he screamed as his certainty continued eroding. I am inevitable. You're neither, I replied with certainty born from my own transformation. You're just the past, trying to prevent the future. But evolution doesn't ask permission from those who refuse to change. The final blow came not from power, but from truth so undeniable even ancient evil couldn't twist it. I loved Nikolai completely. He loved me equally, and that love had transformed us both into beings greater than we could have become alone. No! Mephistopheles' form began to collapse as the fundamental premise of his existence crumbled. Love is weakness. Compassion is failure. Only hunger endures. Then prove it by trying to destroy what we've built, I challenged one final time. His attack never came. Because deep in whatever passed for his consciousness, Mephistopheles finally understood that attempting to destroy our love would only prove its power over his hunger. And with that understanding, his manifestation faded into nothingness. When reality reasserted itself, we stood together in Castle Drachenhertz's courtyard, surrounded by allies who'd proven that change was possible when beings chose to evolve rather than stagnate. "It's over," Nikolai said, pulling me close. "No," I corrected, looking at the gathered assembly of vampires and mortals who'd fought beside us. "It's just beginning. We've proven evolution is possible. Now we prove it's sustainable." 6 months later, our castle had become something unprecedented. A sanctuary where mortal and immortal worked together, where the Order of the Silver Dawn trained alongside vampire warriors, where my former village sent delegations seeking forgiveness and requesting guidance. "They want you to return," my father said during one such visit, his aged face showing genuine remorse. "Not as the girl they discarded, but as the leader they finally recognize you are." "I am leader," I agreed, standing on legs that no longer bore any trace of disability. Just not of the village that taught me my worth came from others' approval. I turned to Nikolai, seeing centuries of partnership stretching before us. "My place is here, Father, with someone who saw my value when I couldn't see it myself. Building a world where broken girls become unbreakable women, where monsters learn mercy, where love proves stronger than any ancient evil." Our story became legend across 2 worlds, proof that true worth transcends physical limitation, that love recognizes value where others see only flaws, and that sometimes the best way to heal broken things is to give them strength to stand proudly rather than forcing them to fit molds they were never meant to occupy. If this tale touched your heart, hit that subscribe button and share with someone who needs to remember their disability doesn't define their destiny. Comment about a time when being underestimated became your greatest advantage. And remember, when the world tries to convince you that broken means worthless, it often means you're being prepared for strength that transcends every limitation they can imagine. Until next time, never let anyone tell you that you can't stand tall simply because they lack the visions to see how you'll eventually soar.